They tried to steal my life. They forged the papers, the signatures, and the deed, selling my home right out from under me to cover up a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme they'd been running through the HOA for years. But you don't mess with a Marine veteran's property, because minutes after the closing papers were filed, an anonymous tip brought the FBI and a dozen squad cars to the HOA president's door. What happened next was a devastating, televised implosion. This is how I exposed the biggest HOA fraud in state history, and sent the Karen who tried to steal my house directly to federal prison. You will not believe the audacity of these people. Trust me, you need to hear this whole insane story, so drop a like right now and hit that subscribe button for more unbelievable property dispute drama. We're diving deep into the darkest HOA secrets. My name is Elias Thorne, and my mistake wasn't buying a house. It was buying a house in the exclusive, gated community of the Arbors. The Arbors wasn't ruled by a democratically elected board. It was ruled by one woman, Clarissa Vance, a self-appointed tyrant with hair higher than her property value and a relentless predatory focus on control. Clarissa wasn't just the HOA president. She was the neighborhood's supreme ruler, a self-styled queen who enforced rules like only white roses are permitted in visible flower beds, and garbage bins must be stored in a manner that does not offend the aesthetic sensibilities of the governing board, which meant Clarissa's sensibilities. The initial conflict was, frankly, pathetic. I had parked my commercial-grade pickup truck, a necessary tool for my construction business, slightly too far forward in my own driveway. A 4-inch violation of the setback line. I received a certified letter, not a friendly reminder, demanding I pay a $50 fine and repaint my entire driveway striping within 72 hours, signed with an imperious flourish by Clarissa Vance herself. I laughed. $50? I sent back a 5-page legally sound counterargument referencing the actual bylaws that define driveway versus street, and concluded that my truck was safely within the defined boundaries of my private property. I thought that was the end of it. It was, instead, the starting gun. Clarissa's response was immediate and terrifyingly personal. The next day, I received a notice of a $500 fine for failure to maintain approved exterior lighting. My 3 low-voltage path lights were apparently 1 lumen too bright. The day after that, a $1,000 fine for unapproved alterations to the primary structure, referencing the weather vane I had installed on my shed that previous weekend. The shed was not a primary structure, and the weather vane was clearly permitted under the accessory dwelling rules. But Clarissa didn't care about the rules. She cared about power. When I refused to pay the mounting, baseless fines, I started receiving official-looking HOA documents stating my home was now under a lien. I knew the lien was bogus, but a cloud on the title is a cloud on the title, and the cost to fight Clarissa legally would quickly surpass the value of the fines. This wasn't about the money. It was about Clarissa needing to break the one homeowner who dared to tell her no. I was fighting a monster that thrived on compliance, and I had just painted a giant target on my back for the sheer crime of parking my truck 4 inches too far forward. The harassment escalated from fines to full-blown psychological warfare. They started citing me for the condition of my lawn, which was professionally manicured. The citation? The shade of green is non-compliant with community standards for the season. I kid you not. They deployed the neighborhood's most ruthless gossipers, Clarissa's personal enforcers, to call the police on me for noise complaints while I was simply watching television inside my own home. They even had the community pool drained for emergency maintenance the day my nieces and nephews were coming over for a planned family swim party. It was petty, cruel, and relentless. Then came the nuclear option. I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, informing me that due to severe and ongoing financial delinquency stemming from unpaid HOA fines, the board had exercised its right under a deeply buried, arguably illegal clause in the original Declaration of Covenants to foreclose on my property. They were not just taking my money. They were trying to take my house. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who specialized in property law. He laughed, then quickly stopped laughing. Elias, he said, this is textbook harassment, but the filings are technically sound. We can fight this, but the court process will take months. They've found a buyer, and they're moving fast. They have an emergency board meeting scheduled for next week to approve the sale. The buyer was an out-of-state holding company, a shell corporation clearly designed to launder the title quickly. This wasn't just Clarissa trying to get my money anymore. This was a conspiracy. I went to the HOA office to confront her. The doors were locked, lights off, and a handwritten sign simply read, "Office closed. All inquiries should be directed to Clarissa Vance's legal counsel." I was officially locked out of my own community's governing body. The emergency board meeting happened secretly, without proper notice. I was not allowed to attend. The motion to sell my house to the shell company for the value of the outstanding fines plus legal fees, a fraction of its market value, passed unanimously. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. It contained an eviction notice. They had successfully sold my home. My blood ran cold, but my mind was sharper than ever. How could an HOA have the resources and the legal muscle to pull off a fraudulent foreclosure and a quick, secretive sale? The answer was bigger than Clarissa's ego. The amount of money was too high, the process too slick. I was on the street, watching movers pull my furniture out of a home I had paid for with 7 years of blood, sweat, and Marine Corps service. I felt utterly helpless, standing on the curb as Clarissa drove by, slowing down just long enough to offer a triumphant, predatory smile. Standing there, watching my life being boxed up, I noticed something small but critical on the back of the moving truck. The company's logo had a small secondary address listed that was not their official headquarters. I remembered seeing the same secondary address listed on the paperwork for the shell company that supposedly bought my house. A tiny detail, an insignificant coincidence, or a breadcrumb. I immediately dove into every financial record I could legally obtain: tax filings, county clerk records, and the HOA's own publicly filed annual statements. It was a dizzying maze of shell companies, phantom expenses, and rapidly rotating board members. But the common thread, the invisible string tying all the illicit activity together, was always Clarissa Vance's name. Every questionable transaction flowed through entities she controlled. I realized the HOA was not a governing body. It was a front. Clarissa and her cronies weren't just collecting dues. They were running a sophisticated, multi-year money laundering operation, using the inflated property values and the HOA's nonprofit status to cycle illicit funds through. The buyer of my home, the shell company, wasn't an innocent investor. It was just the next step in their scheme to convert stolen money into a clean asset. They needed my house's title to be quickly transferred and cleaned before auditors realized the massive discrepancy in the HOA's operating budget. I compiled everything: the forged signatures, the non-compliant meeting minutes, the Shell Corporation filings, and the direct correlation between Clarissa's personal finances and the HOA's phantom expenses. It was a digital dossier of undeniable proof. I didn't go back to my lawyer. The local courts were too slow. I went straight to the top. I walked into the FBI field office, presented my meticulous 300-page binder, simply said, "My HOA is selling my house to a shell company to launder money. You need to stop the sale today." The look on the agent. His face went from dismissive to utterly focused as he flipped through the bank wire receipts I had included. I had them. The next morning, I stood across the street from my house, pretending to water a neighbor's lawn, my phone in my hand, watching. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:58 a.m., a black sedan, then a second, then a third. And finally, 2 unmarked vans screeched to a halt in front of Clarissa's imposing brick mansion. FBI agents, identifiable by their raid jackets, were swarming the property. The FBI was moving on Clarissa's entire operation simultaneously. Her mansion wasn't just a home. It was the nerve center of the laundering scheme, full of documents, burner phones, and computers connected to a web of offshore accounts. As I watched from across the street, Clarissa was led out of her home in handcuffs, her perfectly coiffed hair now disheveled, her face a mask of utter disbelief and rage as the local news helicopters began to circle overhead. The news reports were immediate and damning. Massive HOA fraud ring busted, property values and home titles compromised. The revelation was a cataclysm for the entire community. Not only was Clarissa facing multiple felony counts for fraud, forgery, and money laundering, but the entire HOA board was dissolved, its assets frozen, and every title transfer over the past 3 years was subjected to federal review. My home sale immediately nullified and invalidated. The title, the true title, reverted back to me. The shell company that tried to buy it, seized by the government. The immediate payback was a multi-pronged masterpiece of justice. First, Clarissa was denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to her offshore connections. She was going straight from her palatial mansion to a federal holding cell. Second, every baseless fine she had levied against me and every other homeowner was deemed null and void. The HOA was ordered to pay me $50,000 in restitution for my legal fees and the cost of the fraudulent moving eviction. And third, and most satisfyingly, the video of Clarissa being perp-walked out of her home, screaming about her rights and the unfairness of the federal government, was broadcast live on every major local news station. The Queen of the Arbors, the neighborhood tyrant, was publicly shamed and utterly defeated. I was back in my house that very afternoon, the movers returning my furniture, all expenses paid by the now-defunct HOA treasury. The silence in the Arbors was deafening. No more citations, no more rules, just the sound of a community reeling from the shock of its leader being an international criminal. Clarissa Vance's conviction was swift. Fueled by the mountain of evidence I had provided and the testimony of her now-panicked co-conspirators, she was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. But the final nail wasn't just her conviction. It was what I did next. The HOA was technically still in receivership, and the community was desperate for new leadership. I didn't want the job, but I saw one last opportunity for poetic justice. I ran for the new interim board president on a single-point platform: dissolution. I won in a landslide. My first and only official act as the interim HOA president was to organize a vote to completely dissolve the restrictive, tyrannical homeowners association. It passed 98-2. The Arbors became a normal, rule-free community overnight. No more White-Rose-only rules, no more lumen restrictions, and most importantly, no more Clarissas. But the ultimate secondary revenge move? Remember the 5-page legal argument I wrote about the 4-inch driveway parking violation? The very thing that started this entire insane ordeal? I had that argument professionally framed, along with a copy of Clarissa's booking photo and the headline of her conviction. I then purchased a small, decorative, commercial-grade pickup truck statue, bolted it 4 inches over the newly defined legal setback line of my driveway, and placed the framed document and photo inside my front window, facing the street. Every neighbor, every delivery driver, and every former Clarissa crony had to look at that display and remember the single, tiny parking violation that brought down a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. I didn't just get my house back. I bought freedom for an entire community. The HOA was dead, Clarissa was locked up, and my truck was parked exactly where I wanted it. Justice served, 4 inches at a time. Seriously, what an unbelievable story. That perp walk was absolutely insane. Let me know in the comments below, what was the most shocking part of Clarissa's scam? Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next epic breakdown of these out-of-control Karens.